Pursuing your education during a pandemic can be challenging, but Rowan College of South Jersey is here for you, ready to move you forward safely. The peace of mind a safe learning environment provides is key to student success. To safeguard your health, our medical director guides decisions. We offer confidential mental health counseling, supported by weekly online peer group sessions, and flexible online courses are available. Ring in 2021 safely at Rowan College of South Jersey.
Welcome to Rowan College of South Jersey's continuing series of virtual town halls. I'm Josh Piddington, RCHA's Vice President and Chief Information Officer, and I have the pleasure of acting as the moderator during today's town hall. I want to thank the marketing team who put together that wonderful intro video. If you're new to our virtual town halls, you might be wondering, how do I ask a question? Our goal is to make this as easy as possible, so please look for the chat button. Click or tap that button to send us your questions. Note that if you've called in through the telephone, you'll be unable to ask questions during the event. Finally, we are recording today's town hall, and we will make it available on the town hall website within a couple of days. Now, before we begin today's town hall, I want to clarify that the purpose of today's event is to discuss the science behind the vaccines. As many of you are aware, RCSJ's Gloucester campus is one of the state's 6 mega vaccination sites. However, RCSJ is only assisting with logistics. We do not have the power to schedule vaccinations or affect the process in any way. If you want to schedule a vaccination, please go to the RCSJ website and go to rcsj.edu/vaccine. Once you're there, click the pre-registration button, which will take you to the state's website. Now you can fill out, wait for the screen to catch up, there we are. Now you can fill out the pre-registration form, as well as access other vaccination locations in the state by clicking the where and how to get vaccinated, which again, Dan is showing. You then want to scroll down. And you're going to click out where it says reach out directly to a site near you and attempt to schedule an appointment. Once you do that, you'll see all the various sites that are available in New Jersey. Now, just a word of caution, the mega vaccination site system is not necessarily connected with these other locations that you're seeing. So you just got to kind of, decide how you want to play this and who you want to reach out to. I can tell you from personal family experience, slots are opening up at the mega vaccination locations. They're also opening up at these other locations as more of the vaccine becomes available from the federal government. With that, it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rickards so he can explain the science behind how these vaccinations work, or vaccines work. Dr. Rickards?
So thank you, Josh. So what we've kind of put together today is a plan just to go kind of through the whole idea on why these vaccines work. Why is it that they're designed like this? We're going to start out a little bit with kind of just the general idea of the virus, what a virus is, and why vaccines are set up like this to block these viruses. Then you're going to hear a little bit about kind of the immune system. With me today, I have 3 experts that I know are going to give absolutely outstanding information. First, you're going to hear from Dr. Mark Randa. He's a professor of biology on our Cumberland campus, and he's taught microbiology probably, a whole bunch of times. Is an absolute expert on virus structure. So he's going to go into the structure of the virus. Then you're going to hear from Dr. Jessica DeGraff, a professor on our Gloucester campus. She also has taught microbiology for, I don't know how long. I'm not going to give years for either one of them, but both of them have been teaching for very, very long. And she's going to go into kind of the immune response, the whole idea on how you respond to any type of intruder, in this case, a virus or a vaccine. And we'll kind of tie all that together. Then lastly, you're going to hear from our medical director, Dr. Susan Hall, who's also our dean of our Nursing and Health Professions Division, who's going to go a little bit into kind of the side effects, what to expect with you receiving vaccines. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Randa, and hopefully everybody's going to enjoy and learn a lot from what they hear today.
Thank you, Brendan, Dr. Rickards. So my name is Mark Randa. I've been at Cumberland for quite some time. And I'm going to go a little bit through just the virus itself, viruses in general, and then specifically the virus that we're dealing with now. The best way to describe a virus, as it says on the slide, a virus is a piece of bad news wrapped up in protein. And so this is sort of a hallmark of all viruses. In sort of the darker texts on the left, you sort of see the typical textbook cartoon of a virus. They're all made up of either DNA or RNA, never both. And if you see the purple inside, the polyhedral, it's sort of like a 20-sided die. That's the protein that surrounds the nucleic acid. Depending on who you are and what your study of biology is, typically most biologists don't consider viruses alive because they don't have all of the different sort of life characteristics that we teach in a Bio 101 class. If you're a virologist, you might have a slightly different opinion if you spent your life looking at viruses. When you look at sort of some of the key highlights in sort of like layman terms, viruses only do things when they're inside your host cell. And so a virus on a tabletop, a virus on a doorknob, they're not doing anything. They're inert. They're just a bunch of chemicals, sitting there waiting for you to touch them, get them into your body so that they can attach to your cell. But outside of their hosts, they're essentially inert. They're not made up of cells like a typical paramecium or a plant cell. I mean, the core structure of a virus is simply, a protein structure with some nucleic acids inside of it. Sort of the typical structures you see, organelles, nucleus, mitochondria, none of those are found in viruses. Literally, viruses are the, perfect parasite. They enter your body, they find the perfect cell that they match up with, and then they take over that cell. And so there's no need for them to have a nucleus, no need for them to have mitochondria or any sort of cellular structures. They're completely dependent on that host cell. They don't make energy, they don't have macromolecules, they don't make their own proteins, they don't make their own sugars. They depend 100%, like I said, on the host cell. In terms of reproduction and division, so viruses obviously have the ability to reproduce, but they don't do it on their own. So the virus on the tabletop, if you were, for whatever reason, were to drop HIV or whatever virus that you have in your head onto a table, if you come back the next day, you're not going to have more of that particular virus. They're inert. They're strictly that parasite. There's no mitosis, there's no budding, there's no meiosis. None of those things really apply to viruses. And they've, since their discovery, they've been sort of, studied and classified in sort of their own little field. You can switch to the next slide, Dan. So coronavirus. So coronavirus is a large group of viruses. And in humans, they're typically associated with respiratory illnesses. In animals, it's usually a gastrointestinal, and coronaviruses have been linked quite frequently to bats. When you look at the coronavirus that infects humans, most of the people on this call, the 225 of you, if you go by percentages, probably somewhere about 30 to 40% of you have had a coronavirus some point in your life. Coronaviruses, there's about 4 different strains, and they're all associated with the common cold. So the sniffles, the runny nose that you had at some point in your life could have been caused by a coronavirus. In the last 20 years, I guess 2002 is when it first started, which is, I guess, the birth year of a typical freshman these days, making me kind of old since I remember all this. That was the first sort of coronavirus that sort of hit the pandemic, and that was SARS, which stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. And then the coronavirus, CO stands for coronavirus, and the V virus, and then 1. So this was the first coronavirus that led to a pandemic globally. Started in sort of the China area and then sort of migrated. Canada was much more worse off than we were. 2012, another coronavirus that was linked to bats spread in the Middle East. Not as big of a pandemic, pretty much localized to the Middle East, but very scary. The current pandemic is caused by the SARS-CoV virus 2. And what makes this virus particularly troublesome is that it's not as lethal as the last 2, but it's much more transmissible. And so it spreads much, much easier than any of the other coronaviruses that we have seen. And that's partly the reason why we have such a big problem. So where does the word coronavirus come from? So coronavirus, when I show you the picture on the next slide, it has these big spikes that come out of it, and they look like crowns. And so when you look at them underneath the electron microscope, it looks really fancy with these big, elaborate sort of spikes. Can you go back one slide, Dan? The most important thing, or one of the most important things you hear, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. And the reason being is that soap is really good at disrupting lipid molecules, fat molecules. And so if you were to contact the flu virus or even the coronavirus, washing your hands with warm soapy water inactivates that virus, breaks the virus outer layers apart, it makes it no longer infective. And so one of your number one defenses, protecting yourself and your family members, is washing your hands as much as you possibly can. When you come into the house, you wash your hands, hand sanitizer in the car. All of those things are truly effective in limiting the spread of these types of viruses. So you can go to the next slide, Dan. So this is what SARS looks like. The bright red structures are those big crowns. And in sort of nerdy talk, we call those antigens. Those are the things that are on the outside of the virus that our body recognizes as being foreign. Anything that's foreign that enters in your body, we call that an antigen. And Dr. DeGraff will talk about how we recognize them and what we do with them. The other important thing in this diagram that is important for coronaviruses is the green structure, which is the RNA. The RNA inside of the coronavirus makes this virus, when you look at in terms of changing over time, RNA viruses compared to DNA viruses, compared to bacteria, humans, a giraffe, these types of viruses made up of RNA mutate the fastest. They have a high rate of change. And because of that high rate of change, you start to see, different variants coming about, which has become problematic, and we've heard about in the news. It has an envelope, so that's that middle layer, sort of a light brown that goes around the cell, goes around the virus particle. That is really important. That's the target of soap and the hand sanitizers, the 70% alcohol hand sanitizers. They are extremely effective at breaking up that layer, that envelope. And when you break up that envelope, the virus can no longer infect your cells. The next slide, Dan. So DNA viruses, these are the chicken pox. They can incorporate into your genome, very stable, very few mutations over time. The RNA viruses, they don't incorporate, but they're much less stable. This is what the flu virus is. And because of these mutations, you have to get your flu shot every year. And so the figure on the right, we're not going to go through all of it like it's a biology class or microbiology class, but there's a couple important things that I want to point out to you in terms of the biology of this coronavirus. Number one, in step one, you see that this virus, this coronavirus, binds to what's called an ACE2 receptor. And so the virus is essentially that crown, those spikes are essentially a key. And the ACE2 receptor is the lock. And so this particular strain of virus that's floating around is really good at binding that particular lock. And when it binds to that lock, it opens it up and it allows the virus to come in. Once that virus comes into the cell, steps 2 and 3 and 4, its sole goal, all it wants to do, if it had like a mission, viruses don't have a mission, but its goal is to reproduce, to make as many copies of itself and then to spread them. In step 3, this is where we're getting these variants, where you're making new RNA genomes. And so this particular virus, when it makes new copies of itself in steps 3 and 4, those new viruses are going to be slightly different than the one that originally came in. And so in terms of mutations, if you look at this virus, they're currently estimating that every month the coronavirus is accumulating at least up to 2 to 3 different mutations. And so why are those mutations important? So we talked about these key that's on the end of the coronavirus that is able to bind and let the cell in. If there's changes in that key that makes that key better fit the lock. So imagine you just got a brand new key, you stick it in your lock, it doesn't go in really well, you jiggle it, takes you a little bit of time, but then you finally unlock the door. Over time in these viruses, those keys become much more efficient in some of these mutations. And you can put the key in, you can unlock it really quick, and you can get into the room. And so these mutations, the variants that we're seeing, some of them, that key is changing in such a way that the virus can enter the cell much more efficiently. And if it gets in the cell more efficiently, it's going to reproduce at a higher rate, and it's going to take over the virus population. So that's one of the things that we're very concerned about, is the transmissibility of this particular virus. These particular strains that are popping up are becoming much more efficient at opening up the cell through their mutations. The other thing that becomes important with this spike and mutations is you hear these variants. Are they more lethal? Are they more scary? Are they going to cause more severe disease? And so these spike proteins, these keys, let the cell in or let the virus in, but this is also what our immune system looks at and says, hey, you don't belong here. And so you build up immune response to that particular coronavirus by producing antibodies, what Dr. DeGraff will talk about, but they're going to target those capsid proteins. And what we're finding with some of these variants is that when they change, those antibodies don't bind as well as they used to when we first made the vaccine. It's not a you're immune or you're not immune type of deal. It's not yes or no, black and white issue. There's many shades of gray. And so what they're starting to find is that the changes on these spike proteins are making it that the antibodies we produce don't bind as effectively. Doesn't mean, you're going to get severe disease and it's no longer, the vaccine's no longer useful. It just means that, the antibodies don't bind as efficiently. You'll still get an immune response as of what we know today, but it's slightly different. And so when you hear, oh, there's all these different variants, why should I get a vaccine? Well, you should get a vaccine because you still will build an immune response. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. DeGraff, who's going to spend some time talking about our immune system and how we go about fighting the virus once it gets into our body.
Okay, so basically we saw that a virus's job is to replicate itself. Now, we have natural defenses against these invaders. It doesn't matter if it's a virus or a bacteria. If an infective agent gets into our cells, we want to protect ourselves basically from death. We have nonspecific and specific immune responses. Now, the nonspecific responses are the yucky responses: fever, inflammation, interferon. Interferon gives you vomiting and diarrhea. Basically, your body is trying to get the bad particles out, trying to raise the temperature to speed up the rate of reaction. Your inflammatory response is occurring because the neutrophils are coming to the site and trying to gobble up all the bad stuff. While this is going on, the specific immune response, and this is the one that we're really involved in and we're excited about as far as vaccines are concerned, include your B cells and your T cells. Now, your B cells produce the antibodies. We'll talk about how they do that. And the T cells can actually kill things and also help activate the B cells even further. Next slide. All right, so your specific immune response. We're basically born with all of these B and T cells. And just like Mark was talking to you about the lock and the key, they each fit a special key. And you'd say to yourself, well, why are we born with these things? Well, your ancestors had all kinds of diseases, coronaviruses included. And if they didn't have the special B and T cells that were going to stop death, basically, then they wouldn't have made it and they wouldn't be your ancestors. So we have all of these cells inside the body ready to be activated. Now, the thing is, they can't get activated until a foreign particle comes in and turns them on. So unfortunately, we either have to get sick, or now we've had a process of mimicking the sickness, which we call vaccinations. Now, we talked about, Mark mentioned, if you had a coronavirus before, you might have slight antibody resistance to the new strain. So you might not get it as bad as somebody else who had never seen a coronavirus before. And the reason for this is, again, your non-specific is turning on, going crazy. And the specific, which we'll talk about in the next slide, is what's really getting turned on. And this is what you want to protect you for the future. All right, so T cells. What happens when a T cell or a B cell gets activated? Now, it looks like a biology slide. It's kind of scary, but I want you to think about this. Each T cell and B cell that you have inside of you, it's sticking to a certain thing. So COVID-19 comes in, that T cell recognizes it. How does it get activated? It gets activated because COVID touched it and now turned it on. What happens when they turn on? They get bigger and they divide into two cell lines, not just two cells, but two cell lines. And one of the lines from the T cell is memory. So you started out with one T cell that recognizes COVID. Once it gets activated by COVID, it replicates and gives you lots more of those memory cells that you have ready to go for the next time you're going to see this virus. The other cell, so again, it starts as one, gets two, line, more and more. The other is the functional line, and this actually has a job. And in the case of these particular T cells, you can see that they can kill virally infected cells, and they can also go out and kill bacteria and protozoa and all kinds of things. You can see that tiny little kind of blue shaped cell, that's actually killing a cancer cell. So our T cells, our natural killers, will seek out and destroy cancer cells too, but also COVID infected cells. So your T cell gets bigger, divides into two lines. One is memory, so you have more and more of the same cell that you started with, and then you have a functional one. In the case of T cells, it's going to activate the B cells and then also kill things. Now, the next slide will show you how the B cells activate. Same idea. You say, oh, here's more of these cells. They get bigger, divide into two lines. One is memory B cells, the other is the functional. Now, here's where the good stuff happens. B cells, when they're functional, are called plasma cells, and they secrete soluble antibody. It's all right, well, I hear all this stuff about antibodies. What are they? If you notice the B cell up in the top left-hand corner, it looks like a little Y. Those two little Y units stick to bad things. And when they get activated, cell gets bigger, and half the cells are going to have memory with the little activators on them. The other half are going to send out the activators, which we call antibodies. You say, what's the big deal about an antibody? Well, this little Y-shaped antibody sticks to virus particles, doesn't allow them to attach. So we talked about how the spike proteins allow attachment and gain access into the cells. These antibodies will coat the virus and block it from getting into your cells. So they'll neutralize the virus. This is awesome. The other thing they'll do is they act as a flag. So the little Y part sticks to the bad stuff. The little tail part says, hey, get over here, macrophages. Come and gobble me up because this is bad stuff I'm stuck to. And then they'll clump things together to make it easier for the macrophages to come along. So again, this is silently happening. You don't see it happening unless you actually get your blood tested and you test how much antibody you happen to have inside of you. But these antibodies take some time. It takes weeks to really get a good, robust immune reaction after you've initially started this activation. Next slide. Now, why do I need a second dose? If you notice this chart, and this is pretty much what happens for all things that get activated and turn on the B and T cell response. You have an immune response which gives you some memory antibodies, but they don't last long and you don't have a ton of them activated. It's the second time you see that infectious agent. Now, the second time you see it, you build a huger immune response, exponentially higher. Now, what's kind of interesting about COVID is that Rita Wilson, I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's Tom Hanks's wife. They got COVID about a year ago. She just got her antibody titer tested, and she said, I don't have antibodies anymore. Well, you know what? At the same time, another study has come out that people that have been infected with COVID, when they get their first shot of the vaccine, they have a 10-fold increase in antibody response over a person that never had COVID in the first place. What does this mean? It means that if you got COVID, or when you get your first dose of the vaccine, you're activating the B and T cells, you're making memory, you have antibodies, but you need that second shot, that second activation, which is then going to catapult your immunity and your immune response so that the next time someone breathes in your face and coughs on you with COVID, these antibodies are all ready to go. They're in your secretions, your saliva, your tears, your serum. They're all over in the body, ready, and they're silent. They're not giving you the fever, the inflammatory response, and all the yucky, gross feelings. So you could have gotten a sickness back, years years ago, and you can keep getting exposed to that same sickness, yet you never even know it because your immune response is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Next slide. Now, what we're talking about here is activating the immune response. Our specific immunities, you can either activate the immune response or you can steal somebody else's antibodies that already activated their own immune response. The problem with activating the immune response is that you get sick, and nobody likes that. You feel yucky. It's gross. So what we've done is we have a way to fake out the body and put a little bit of the infectious agent inside us, but yet not make you sick. And that's what we call a vaccine. Now, we'll talk about vaccines in a second, and the different types and why they're working so well. But there's another response called passive. And what happens is if a person gets COVID-19 and they survive, they're going to have serum antibodies. So they'll take out some of their blood, they'll take out the antibodies from their blood, and then they can give it to very sick COVID-19 patients. Why? Because those little antibodies are going to stick to the viral particles and help the patient that's sick survive while their own immunity is becoming active and they're making their own memory. And that's called passive immunity. Now, there's a natural way we do this. Moms who breastfeed are sending their antibodies through breast milk, and the placenta, they're sending their antibodies to the placenta. So we know that this is a thing that we do. But now we're actually using the serum antibodies, which, by the way, we've been using for a good 20 years, convalescent patient plasma. But again, if you see that in the news and you say, what's this about taking someone's antibodies or monoclonal antibodies? These are pre-made antibodies that'll give you the ability to allow your immune response to get active without basically you dying. Next slide. All right, so now we got all these vaccinations, and I hear these questions. This was a new vaccine, or we don't know anything about it. It's only been a year. Let me tell you a little bit about how vaccines are made. Unfortunately, especially in the case of viruses, you got to grow this. You got to grow it in cells. As Mark mentioned, it doesn't just sit there and replicate on a surface. What happens is you got to inject it into cells, and what we use is embryonated eggs a lot of times, and we'll let the chicken eggs make the virus for us, and then you have to take out the virus. You have to inactivate it or completely destroy it because you don't want to inject that virus inside of a person. The whole time lab workers are working with this infectious, dangerous substance. And sometimes even the inactivated viruses are not safe enough. They're still causing such a response that they have to just take pieces out, and then they'll put pieces inside of you. And if you notice here on the list, smallpoxes are only live, like straight up live. Now, we're not giving the smallpox. It's like a cross between smallpox and cowpox. But the good thing about live vaccines is that they replicate inside of you and they give you more memory, turn on the response so that you have lots of antibodies. They last the longest out of all the vaccinations. Live attenuated, same idea, but they mutate it and they make sure that it's weak enough. And that's your chickenpox vaccine, your MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, and your oral polio, which we don't give anymore. Why? Because there are some side effects with the live attenuated. The oral polio, what they've done is they inactivated it completely. So instead of it replicating inside of you and maybe doing weird stuff, it's completely dead, we call it, dead virus, even though it's not alive. And that's the injected polio that you take right now. Polio is an interesting case study as well, and we'll talk about that in a second. Now, for the DTP shot, those are just pieces, antigenic molecules, just pieces. Now, again, what's the problem and how come it takes so long? They got to grow the bacteria or the virus. Then they have to purify the protein that they think is going to elicit a response. Then they have to test it out to see if it's going to work. All of this takes time. Now, the other three that are underlined, they're recombinant. And what the scientists have been doing with these guys, instead of having to grow the virus or replicate anything and work with these dangerous substances, they are discovering which protein on the surface of a virus, and in the case of COVID-19, it's that spike protein. They're finding the antigenic protein. Then what you can do, you know the protein amino acid sequence. If you know the amino acid sequence, you can use the genetic code to determine the message, the little messenger piece that is the code for this spike protein. Okay, this is all biology. You say, oh, this is way beyond me. It's not. And it's really easy to do these kinds of things. And it's quick. Now, once you figure out that specific code for the spike, next slide. Now we can have our bodies make the protein for us. The thing about mRNA, if you inject it into muscle cells, it doesn't matter what mRNA it's from, your muscle cells will say, oh, I'm supposed to make this protein. Well, they make a weird protein, right? And immediately your body's like, whoa, I don't like it. Your immune response happens, inflammatory response, maybe even fever, because it's like, whoa, danger, danger. And then your B and T cells come along and they get activated in response to the protein that your muscle cells made that was from some random weird antigenic disease. You say, okay, well, why is that a good thing? Because you cut out all the middlemen and you let your own body make the protein, which then your body will respond to. It's super fast to make the messenger RNA. It's super fast to change it if there's a mutation. And then you have this immune response, you have B and T cells activated, and you have protection and memory. Now, if you notice here, I have a slide showing you there's the RNA. Again, it's the code that's going to give you ultimately that spike protein. Why do we want the spike protein? Because the spike protein is what your body needs to stick to block that COVID-19 from getting in. So we activate the B and T cells, make tons of antibodies in response to this little message that our muscle cells made into protein for us. Next slide. Now I had some questions kind of rattling around in my brain, and I hope I answered a few of them. But the vaccine, it's only been out for less than a year. Yeah, because this technology is quick. It's the best technology right now with the least amount of side effects for everybody involved. Why should I trust it? Well, there are two options. You can take your risk getting the COVID-19 disease, or you can use a shot that's going to, cause you a slight discomfort, a touch of what the disease would cause. And then you will have immunity to it. Why do I need a second shot? Well, I'm hoping that you realize after the first shot, you do have immunity, maybe for 3 months, but you want to bump it up even higher. You want an exponential response so that, you have tons of antibodies all around in your, surrounding your body and blocking all that stuff. How about this? I hear there are bad side effects, especially after the second shot. I had heard, well, there was a tennis-sized ball under someone's arm because of the immune response. Well, if you get a tennis-sized ball under your arm from the immune response from this little piece of a spike protein, can you imagine what your immune response is going to look like if you get the COVID-19 actually? So yes, there are going to be more side effects because it's showing you that your body has responded in a robust way and is going to activate and turn on and give you memory and have this for, the next couple of years, we're hoping. If the virus is mutating, shouldn't I wait? I think Mark let you know why. That little bit of immunity, even if you got the coronavirus back in the day, you're still going to have slight immunity. You're going to have enough antibodies to kind of stop it, to slow it down so that your response can take over and so that you don't die. At least that's what we're, hoping. We talked about the allergic reactions. Every vaccine on the planet gives people allergic reactions. Not everybody gets the allergic reactions, but somebody will from every shot out there. If you have specific allergies or you've been allergic to a shot before or had an allergic response to a shot before, that's an over response, you need to talk to your doctor about that. Those are important things. But again, what they've done is we've done 32 million shots in the United States, and there have been very, very few, smaller than most vaccines. Now, again, you say, well, my doctor didn't tell me all these things. You know that pack of paper that you sign and you check off and you say, yeah, my firstborn. Basically, what you're doing is you're signing off on all the side effects that the vaccine that you're getting could possibly give you. Okay, so you need to be aware of what issues you might have had with vaccines, and those are the only people that really need to worry about that. Now, my last question, it just reminds me of a conversation I had with my dad. COVID-19 isn't bad for most people. Is it really necessary? We talked about polio. And I said, oh, the diseases now are so much worse. And my dad said, I was growing up and we were scared to go in the water each spring because we were afraid we were going to get a sickness that was going to paralyze us for life and be in an iron lung. And I never even thought about polio that way because I've been vaccinated. All of us have been vaccinated against polio. Here's the thing about polio. 99% of all people that got polio, it's like the common cold. No big deal. Less than 1% is paralytic polio. And even less percent, probably 0.5% about gives you paralytic polio, for all time. You don't ever get that feeling back. Tiny. Would you want to risk that tiny percent if you happen to be that 0.5% of people that actually gets paralysis from polio, I, for one, no, thank you. I'm fully shotted up with my polio vaccines, and I'm all about that. So I think that's, how bad is it? Oh, should we just let it run through the population? Well, those are all questions for last year. It's too late now. It's in the population, and it is super dangerous for certain people. And unfortunately, it's going to probably be endemic. And what does that mean? It just means it's going to be with us, and we're just going to have to get a booster shot each year, just like we do with flu. So I hope that gave you a little bit of an idea of why it takes so long for your body to kind of like respond to this, and also, some of the things that's going on inside of your own body. So if you have any more questions, you can send them on in. Thanks. Oh, I'm sending it back to Dr. Rickards. So Brendan, it's all you.
Thank you. So Jessica and Mark, thank you both very much. I think that this was excellent to hear kind of the background of virus structure and how it connects largely to vaccines, because as we all know, getting the immunity and being able to fight off any type of an infection. I mean, that's the core idea here, right? You hear about people getting it, can they get reinfected, whatever. But in any case, the whole idea behind this is so that everybody can kind of understand why we get these vaccines, why vaccines are necessary, and the help that they really are for the population. Now, in terms of the vaccines that are available today, the Moderna and Pfizer ones that you commonly hear about, those are those messenger RNA vaccines. And that's exactly what Dr. DeGraff was referring to. Now, I do want to kind of just address the reason that those have to be kept very, very cold is because of the scientific nature of messenger RNA. It itself is inherently unstable. And the reason for that is because it actually has an additional oxygen group on the actual sugar that makes it up. And it is a single strand molecule, meaning it's very, very small. In our bodies, it's a natural product. Every single cell produces tons and tons of messenger RNA. Your cells are pumping that out every day. So if you hear people saying, oh, it's foreign, I don't want to put it in my body, I can tell you right now, you look at the end of your finger, there's so much more messenger RNA there than there ever is going to be in these vaccines. So the difference is that messenger RNA that's going in is not produced specifically by your body to make that protein. This messenger RNA simply will direct those muscle cells to make that spike protein so that we will make the actual antibodies to that. So that's really the reason why they're unstable. But in any case, that's kind of the whole idea behind the science behind the vaccine. The last thing that we're going to hear from our panelist, from Dr. Hall, she's going to tell you a little bit about what to expect with the vaccine in terms of the side effects and kind of the whole idea behind getting that second booster and why you stick with the same types. And I know there's a lot of questions in the chat. Hopefully we'll be able to reach all of these. But I'll turn it over to Dr. Hall.
Thanks, Dr. Rickards. Dan, can you go back to the slides? Okay. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging in there. That was so informative. Thanks, Jess and Mark, for your information. Okay, so now I'm going to take it from the next step. You have your appointment. So congratulations, you got your appointment. Now what? So when you go to get your vaccine, you and the healthcare worker need to be wearing masks when you're in lines, when you're getting ready to go in. If you've been on the Gloucester campus recently, I can tell you just from my own observation that people are here in our parking lots at 5 o'clock in the morning. They get in line, but our community of people who are helping here do a great job keeping everybody separated. They do keep those distance as best they can, but many of the times people are in line hours just to get them here. Once the vaccine site opens, they kind of go through quickly. When you come in and you're seated with that care provider, there's going to be a series of questions that they're going to go through because we really want to do a nice screening. I myself and many of my colleagues are giving the vaccines here at the mega site and in other sites in our areas. So we kind of go through a series of questions just to make sure that you're in a good state of health. And what that really means is, based on the information that Mark and Jess shared, is that we want to make sure that your system is ready for this vaccination. So we do screen and we say, are you in a good state of health? What we're looking for is to make sure that you don't have a fever or a cough or any type of acute illness that would really present possibly a conflict or an interaction with the vaccine. Another question we're going to ask is, did you get a vaccine within the last 14 days? The reason for that is the body's working very hard to develop these antibodies to fight the virus. If there's another vaccine, such as a flu vaccine or a shingles vaccine, the body's getting what we say in general terms, a little bit confused on what to develop, how to develop, and what to fight against. So we really ask that you refrain from getting another vaccine within 14 days of getting the COVID vaccine. And trust me when I say your healthcare providers, your doctors, nurse practitioners, PAs can certainly guide you in that if you have any questions. Another question we're going to ask you is, have you been diagnosed with COVID-19 in the past 90 days? And because of that, just as was discussed, we're waiting for that virus to kind of really just reduce itself, so to speak. We really don't want to give a vaccine in what we call the acute phase of the virus itself. Another a question that we ask, and I did see this in the chat, is we're going to ask about allergic reactions. The reason for that is, although all things considered, you're in a great state of health, we are injecting, with your permission, obviously, this vaccine, which may immediately be viewed as foreign. When we talk about allergic reactions, it's an immune response to something that the body really wasn't expecting. So when we do this series of questions, we want to know, should we be watching you a little bit longer? And when we do our screening here, we'll say, you know, you're either going to be observed for 30 minutes or 15 minutes, depending on your answers to the questions. Next slide, please. So after you've gotten the vaccine, now what? Okay, so we talked a little bit about this. So some of this is a repeat, but it's just kind of a summary. After you have that, you may have some side effects, which they're normal signs that your body's building up protection. The side effects don't necessarily affect your abilities to do everyday activities, and they should go away in a few days. But the most common side effects, the arm where you got the shot, and this is a direct quote from the CDC. We would have used the healthcare term injection, but I took it from the website. We have some discomfort. The best way to reduce that discomfort is keep that arm moving. Really, it's just a localized, what we would call an irritation. Sometimes cool compresses help. Or warm, depending on your comfort level. Throughout the rest of the body, you may feel some fever or chills or headache. To reduce this discomfort, drinking adequate fluids, and you really need to call your healthcare provider if Tylenol or Motrin is not relieving those symptoms. You really do want to report if there's redness at that site, or the side effects are just causing major distress, even if it's emotional or anxiety that you're feeling these side effects and you just can't get comfortable. You really need to call your healthcare provider. Make sure that you tell them what you have. With each vaccine, you'll get an identification card. The identification cards are really just issued collectively from the CDC. It has the name of the manufacturer, whether it's Pfizer, Moderna, it'll have the lot number, and it will have where you got the injection. So you should get that at every site you're at. It's very important when you go back for that second vaccine that you bring that card back so they can document that as well, and that's your proof that you had both vaccines. So if you have some side effects, you want to have that card available so that you have that lot number to share with your healthcare provider, and there's all kinds of resources that they would have if these side effects do not seem like they're resolving in what we would call a reasonable amount of time. Next slide, please.
Dr. Hall, quick question that's kind of come up with what you're talking about. So let's say you get Pfizer the first time, you go to the site the next time, they have Moderna. Is it okay to mix those, or do you need to stay with the first one that you got, the first manufacturer?
So the recommendation right now is to stay with the same manufacturer. And specifically, that's because we can really monitor if there are side effects, or especially even the lot numbers. You know, if anybody else wants to weigh in on that, that's really the recommendation we're giving at the sites right now. Okay, we'll move on. This next point just talks about, as just very nicely put together, you need the 2 shots right now. We do know there's some research out there and other manufacturers where they're attempting to have the 1 dose be effective. But right now, where we are today in February 2021, we have the 2-dose series going through, okay? Even after you get your vaccine, it's all over the literature. We still need to wear our masks. We still need to maintain that social distance. Hand washing, just as so eloquently was described in our presentation, is what's going to keep those viruses down. So continue following the guidelines from the CDC and the health department. And the biggest question we get over and over again is, after I get the COVID-19 vaccine, will I test positive on the viral test? And the answer to that is no. When you test, you'll see the virus test there, and it really does demonstrate that you do not have a current infection. And the last point I wanted to make is, when your body develops the immune response, which is the goal of vaccination, you may test on some antibody test. So that way you know you have protection against the virus. The information that I presented here was directly from the CDC website, and also in conjunction with the experiences we here have at the mega site administering the vaccine. I hope this information was helpful, and I'll now turn it back to Josh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hall. So I guess a quick question around the actual administration of the vaccine, people that go get it. If someone is somewhat sick, let's say they have a sinus infection or a cold, is it okay to still get the shot, or do you need to wait until you're better? You don't have the cold, you don't have the sinus infection anymore?
The recommendation is that there's no evidence of any kind of infection activity.
All right, very good. So try to be better, I guess, would be the answer to come on in there. Brendan, here's a quick question. Are employees going to be required to get vaccinated?
So at this time, it's highly unlikely. I know one of the questions that was coming through also was, will the vaccine eventually be required for any type of positions, working with childcare, et cetera? I can say at RCSJ, the logistics of this right now appear to be preventative from that happening for the college. But if you're going to work in certain healthcare industries, I'm going to tell you right now how a lot of the healthcare industries work are, if you don't get the vaccine, then you don't get a job. So it's going to vary in terms. So for the college at this point, it does not look like it. But one of the other questions in terms of other jobs, it's going to vary by industry. Some industries are going to require, some are not. One other thing that I just wanted to pick up on, because I know there's a lot of questions out there, and I highly doubt we're going to be able to get to everybody's question today. When you hear things in the news and when you hear things scientifically, and what I'm seeing with a lot of these questions is I've heard or I've seen this. Pay attention to the language that you. If you ever hear a scientist or a physician say, this may cause this, think about that, right? If this says it may, I usually take that as a science as well. We don't know. So that's somebody, yeah, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I could say, maybe the sky is going to turn black in the next 2 hours. I have no idea, right? But if you hear a scientist or a physician saying that it does cause, or this causes, X causes Y or anything, or X is implicated in this outcome, you need to pay attention, because that means that it has been scientifically shown somewhere in the literature. And another thing that you always hear from physicians, and I talked to my brother a lot about this last night, he's actually in his 3rd year of residency, is, can I shed the virus after being vaccinated? And he said the results are still coming back, that it's possible. They don't know exactly what's going to happen there, how long that would take, or if you're shedding particles. But the idea is you would be shedding far less than anyone else that was unvaccinated. And the other thing is boosters. They still don't know, because like Mark had mentioned, the variants that you're going to see, there's no way to know what those variants are going to be. And we could have a whole ton of variants and have problems, or the variants could cause absolutely no change and the vaccine could last, make your immune system last indefinitely. We just don't know scientifically, and the physicians just don't know this.
Yeah, I mean, it could kind of become like the flu shot, where every year you need to get a new version of the flu shot because the flu constantly changes. Mark, so one of the questions that's come through, and I've seen this just in various places too, is basically, I think people misunderstand the coronavirus versus COVID-19. And some people think that the coronavirus, or COVID-19, really has been around for years. And the question is, why weren't we prepared for it? Can you just briefly explain, what coronaviruses are kind of as a category?
So coronavirus is the virus that causes COVID-19. COVID-19 is the disease, and we discovered it in 2019. So that's the naming. And so viruses, they come in, there's a large group of viruses because of, we classify them based on, do they have the same nucleic acid? Do they infect the same type of cells? And so there's lots of coronaviruses out there. And this particular coronavirus, one of the questions you get is, where did it come from? Is this, some sort of biological weapon, or, that's sort of, conspiracy theory. And so we know that bats are a natural reservoir for a lot of the different coronaviruses that are out there. And it appears that this particular coronavirus originated in a bat and sort of crossed over into the human population at some point in China and then spread globally. And what makes them all a little bit different is we look at them in terms of sort of like sequencing the genome. And so back in the day, you would do DNA fingerprintings. And so now, with the way technology is, you just sequence the whole entire genome and you can compare them. And so this particular coronavirus that we're dealing with now, SARS-CoV-2, is about 80% similar to the SARS that was around in 2002. And so we sort of group them all together based on how similar they are. And so it's a large group. And what separates the ones that are very lethal versus the ones that cause the common cold is the type of cells that they're able to bind to and how efficiently they're able to bind to them, how transmissible they become. And for, whatever reasons we haven't figured out, this particular COVID has a key that fits to this very specific receptor. And this is a receptor that you find all throughout your body. That ACE receptor is found in your respiratory cells, your blood vessels, your cardiac tissue. And so that's why you hear all these stories like, oh, this person, they have heart disease. This person has, blood clotting or has this type of problem. This is a virus that is binding to a really important receptor that's found all throughout the body, which makes it a little bit worse. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you. Quick note. So the question came in, has it been confirmed that we'll need a booster shot every year? No, nothing's been confirmed at this point. The worry is just the mutations of the virus. Jessica, so another point that comes up with folks, and we've had it in the chat a few times, is just how safe is it to take any one of these vaccines because they were developed so quickly? How could they possibly be developed so quickly and be safe at the same time?
Right. So the nature of the mRNA, again, you don't have to grow the organism. You don't have to purify the protein. All of these things take months. If you're using HPLC, I mean, you're talking about companies spending millions of dollars months. What this is doing is it's cutting that all out, and you're taking the sequence and making your cells go through all that process that these biotech companies will be doing. And you're letting the human body do its job, and then our own immune response will then attack that. So it's absolutely viable that this vaccine did come out in the 6 months that it did. In addition, keep in mind this coronavirus. I mean, I've been waiting for a coronavirus vaccine since the beginning of time. I get laryngitis and I can't speak, and as you can tell, I like to speak. So not a fan, but they mutate so quickly. I think in China, they were working on a SARS vaccine. I think they were looking for a safer SARS alternative to try to come up with a vaccine for it. And I think that's what happened. And I'm sure the World Health Organization or whatever powers that be will find out that that was indeed the case. And it escaped. These things happen. But at the same time, it has these side effects, as you were saying, that it's, as Mark was mentioning, it's hitting all receptors. As a matter of fact, now they just found that it's attacking the pancreatic cells. And this might be a reason why diabetics and people that are obese have such a higher mortality rate. So it's new, it's so new, and they're just coming up with all these new things, and the technology is cool. But again, as far as do you trust it? Do you trust that you're going to survive the COVID? I mean, those are two questions that I can't answer.
No, thank you. Here's another question. I don't know if this would be for Mark, Jessica, or Brendan. So there's a preprint study for AstraZeneca where they're saying that the vaccine demonstrates an ability to essentially stop shedding by about 67%, meaning that you become less contagious when it comes to transmission. Do we think that's going to also follow through with Pfizer, Moderna? And let's say that it does, somewhere around there. Do we think that will ultimately be enough to stop COVID from spreading, from continuing to spread and mutate?
So I think we can all take it and add some input. And so for me, what I want to say, they say, oh, this is 95% versus, 94% versus 67%. And people are looking at those numbers and they're saying they're so drastic. I believe as of today, nobody has died that's been vaccinated of COVID. And so it's a 100% success rate. And when you look at all of these vaccines, people that are being vaccinated are not going to the hospital like people who are being unvaccinated. And so part of it, when you're looking at these vaccines, a lot of time you don't have a choice. You're going to show up and whatever has arrived at that vaccination center to give to you, you're going to get, or you're going to have to get back in line and wait forever. And so my main point would be that all of the vaccines are doing positive work and they're all going to contribute to stopping the spread of COVID. One of the other things that comes up is like, oh, 67% versus 95%. You also have to remember that these clinical studies, phase 1, 2, and 3, have been done at very different times and in different locations. And so Pfizer and Moderna have gotten their FDA approval a while ago, before the UK strain was so prevalent, before the Brazilian strain was so prevalent. And now that Johnson & Johnson's coming out, they're testing, in the field with live people, taking these vaccines where the variant is. And so the numbers, everybody looks at the numbers, but I think the most important thing from a public health is that they're all working very well to stop the spread of COVID or stop death and people going to the hospital. I'll turn it over to Jess and Brendan to also put some thoughts onto it.
Well, yeah, I mean, if all you have is the J&J shot, 67% is better than 0%. The mutant variants, honestly, in South Africa, they're having an issue. I have a feeling it's because of co-infection with HIV. They're already immune suppressed. So that's been kind of thrown out there. The idea is what Israel did, I believe, like, what do they have? 58% of their population is now already vaccinated. I think the issue is to get the vaccinations into the people. And in Jersey, as you can see, it's, there's a bit of a lag. And so whatever the deal is, they got to get us vaccinated ASAP is really the only way that's going to stop this thing. So.
I think
masks, what is it? Double mask, triple mask, quadruple mask. I mean, I don't know. There's too many people with it, asymptomatic.
I agree. And I think the only thing that I would add is, if you're shedding the virus, right? If it decreases that shedding that you would be producing, the idea is it decreases. There's a term that's used that I'm not going to get real geeky about, but it's on the infection spread, and just like basically it's the infectious nature of the virus, right? And so if you're shedding less, you're going to be basically exposing less people. They're going to get less of a viral load, meaning less of an exposure if they were in your presence. And so the idea is, if we can have more and more people vaccinated with that, the decrease in that, it's going to decrease, we'll call it the infective nature of that virus, so that it wouldn't spread through the population nearly as effectively as if it would have in any type of we'll say just an unvaccinated type population.
Thank you very much. So people are wondering if they sign. I'm just going to answer a few questions here. People are they sign up at the state mega site. They're wondering if they'll get contacted when it's available for them to go schedule an appointment. The answer is yes. You'll get an email that essentially says that it's time to go schedule an appointment with a link. You'll click that link. It'll bring you to a website where you'll kind of verify who you are. And then you'll be able to go from there and actually see what is available to schedule an appointment. Again, if you're in 1C, it's probably going to be a while, to be honest. None of us on this panel have any specifics, again, because it's being run by the state and the county, and our college is assisting. That's really all it is logistical support. Here's a quick question for everybody on the panel, and I think I know the answer, but is there anyone on this panel that does not plan to get vaccinated?
I'll start. The answer to that is, I will be vaccinated. My entire family will be vaccinated. They can argue with me all they want. My parents are both 7. Actually, yesterday was my father's 71st birthday. So he has COPD. They have literally not left the house with the exception of my mom driving basically to Walmart to have groceries put in the back of their car. They live in West Virginia. They got their first vaccination a couple weeks ago. They're due for their next shot, and they're super excited because they're coming out. They've both gotten vaccinated. My father-in-law is getting vaccinated. Amazing side note, his vaccination, his first appointment is right around kickoff for the Super Bowl at the mega site at Morristown Mall. Maybe appointments available then, just putting it out there. But in any case, that's literally when his first one's scheduled. So everyone in my family that's qualified, this isn't up for debate in my house. This is one of those things that I know the science behind this stuff. I think Mark and Jessica have done a great job describing kind of the background behind it. The protective nature of what you get from this far and above outweighs anything that you could potentially get. And I know people worry a little bit, and you heard the tennis ball size, thing, swelling or whatever, or you don't feel well for a little bit. I'm also here to tell you, my brother in the 3rd-year residency was doing rotations all the way through the hospital. He said the worst day was the day he had to tell a woman that his mother and his brother and her mother and her brother both passed away from COVID. So I'm telling you right now, nobody's dying from it. Any little side effects, so you don't feel so well for a day or two. You know what? In my house, I call that move on. You get sick a little bit, time to get over it. So everybody in my house that's eligible, I'm telling you right now, it's not up for debate in my house.
It's very similar with me and my family. I don't know when our number will be called. My wife and I, we're not obviously in a high risk group. We're not old and older or have any pre-existing conditions, but we're signed up for whenever our number gets called, we're going to get vaccinated. Something that is important for everybody that's on this call or on this webinar. In the beginning, we showed you how to register to get in line. And we hear constantly that the older population, my parents, my aunts and uncles, are just having a really hard time navigating the internet to get these appointments. And so this is when the millennial generation of your Amazon shopping and internet surfing comes in super handy. You should, honestly be reaching out to all of the older people that have pre-existing conditions that aren't internet savvy. I mean, my parents are both getting vaccinated, luckily today, but they couldn't make appointments. They couldn't figure out the internet and how to make it, and the timed out. And me, I had to make my dad's appointment, and my wife made my mom's appointment. And the same thing with my in-laws. And so we're getting vaccinated, but there's a large group of people that we love and we care about that are having a really difficult time getting in line for the shot, and that's terrible. And the call lines are ridiculously long, and nobody's going to wait for them. And so, wash your hands and get your family members appointments so that they can get the vaccine, so that they can return to sort of a semi-normal life and be safe. And I'll turn over to Jess to talk about her family and vaccinations.
Oh yeah, my parents are still in line. I mean, they're waiting, so they're just waiting to get a chance to even sign up, because it's a little tricky. There's certain places that have more ease, but again, it's a Jersey thing, and I'm just hoping that eventually we'll get more vaccine in the works, and then just get it out to as many people as we humanly possibly can. But I think in the next couple of months. There was a lot of hiccups in November, December, January. Not sure if anybody was watching the news, but now that all that's calmed down, I think that we'll be good. So don't worry. I think by July, probably a good chunk of Jersey will be vaccinated.
So
Dr. Hall?
in addition to working here at the college, I also work for Inspira in response to the COVID care support group. In working with our healthcare providers and working over the holidays, I had my first vaccine on Christmas Eve. And I will tell you that it was during work time. I got a call, went down, got the vaccine, went back to work. There were no issues, finished my 12-hour shift. The second shot I got before I went to my shift, and I was really fine for 24 hours, but it was almost 24 hours to the minute of the very next day where my arm started to ache. I started to get the chills, and I thought, oh yeah, I did this. That's right, I did this 24 hours ago. I took some Tylenol, felt fine. Really had no reactions after that, didn't lose any work time the next day. But I could tell you that I did realize there was something going on in that I just got a bunch of blankets and just hydrated well and just kind of moved on. My entire family, they have registered. A couple have appointments, but to date, they're just waiting in line like everyone else. And really the best thing that we can do for everyone, even as Mark said, is help with the technology, help with the education, help with the research. Again, the really, better information is that reliable source information, kind of what Brendan said about the news. Look at those reliable sources that are coming out as opposed to hearsay and non-authentic websites and resources. So thanks again for your time.
That's a wonderful point. My family, everyone's going to get the vaccination, except for my children because they're young. And that is one question that has come in. And I don't know if Jessica or Mark, if you could speak to why is it right now that children under the age of 16 can't get vaccinated?
They don't have any data. And they've also found that with the data that they do have with the children getting the COVID, they just don't have the immune reaction and the death rates that the elderly do. So now, if it was different and children were dying from COVID left and right, I mean, there is some side effect of like a Guillain-Barré kind of thing, but they haven't seen that. So because they haven't seen that, they're really pushing to try to get the most vulnerable populations vaccinated. If it were different, they would be, pushing for the children. As of right now, it's like more of a minor thing. And it's probably, at least this is my theory, the kiddies have been getting corona a lot more than the elderly. Because if your child has a common cold, you're not bringing them over to your 78-year-old parents' house to, give them a sickness. So probably the elderly population don't even have that immunity that the children would have had for 4, 5, 6 years, that they've been blowing their noses on each other's shirts and things like that. So it seems like they might have that kind of a situation going on. But I will guarantee you there will be a vaccine for children very shortly. Yeah.
I would agree. It appears, throughout this whole entire outbreak that the children aren't in the highest risk group. I mean, there's always exceptions to the rule. And children typically aren't in the clinical studies in phase 1 and phase 2 to deem that it's safe. And the current vaccines are all on emergency use. So I'm sure as time progresses, you'll start to move down. And you're seeing a bunch of questions about my child is 17, should they get it? My advice would be anybody that's 16 and over, you should get the vaccine when your number is called to stop the spread. And a lot of people are asking, well, my family member has this condition, my family member has that condition. These for me are questions that you get in line, you register, and then talk to your primary care provider about the vaccine and safety issues. But anybody that has a pre-existing condition, you need to get your name on that list.
All right, excellent, thank you. Just a couple more questions. This one I've seen come in a few times. So if you've had coronavirus in the past and now you've recovered, do you still need to get vaccinated? Should you still get vaccinated? Who wants to take this one?
Well, this was the Tom Hanks's wife doesn't have the serum antibodies anymore. She still has immunity to the point where I'm sure she won't die if she gets reinfected. But if you're not having the serum antibodies and they've already diminished, you need that booster. Again, I think they do tell you if you're like just got done with it or whatever, maybe that's a different story. Like if you just had it last week and lost and you still don't have a sense of taste and smell, you probably talk to your doctor.
As a second note, the virus is changing. And as we sort of talked about, it's not a black and white issue where, oh, I got it, you're safe forever. The vaccines are providing some protection to some of these variants. And the Brazilian one is the one that people are most scared about. And they found it because all these people are getting reinfected with this new variant that were previously exposed. And so the vaccines do offer protection against some of them as of right now. And so it is important, even if you had corona, to get vaccinated after those 90 days to make sure that you have the most protection afforded to you going forward.
Thank you, Mark.
And I just
Jessica,
want to,
and Dr. Hall spoke to, I'm sorry,
oh,
Brendan,
I
do
was
you have
just,
something
I was
to
just
say?
gonna, yeah, I was just gonna add on. You know, getting the vaccine after the reinfection also goes back to one of the things that Dr. DeGraff had mentioned, just on the primary and the secondary immune response, because it's the whole idea of getting the booster, right? Even if you've been exposed, you want that re-exposure to quote unquote boost. Anytime you hear this term booster, it's just another vaccine. They're called boosters because it's boosting the memory cells that you have. So if you've been infected with it, getting the doses of the vaccine, all it's going to do is boost that memory so that you can fight it off much better. So absolutely, if you've already had COVID, I would follow through with the vaccine.
And that's great. I mean, Brendan, that kind of answers the question I was about to ask, which is, why is it that that second shot seems to be making people, more sick, at least temporarily, have those kind of flu-like symptoms? And to your point, I guess it's because your body's ready to fight this off and it sees it come in again now. So it's just even, it's ready to go this time.
It is, and I've always looked at your immune system as being the army protecting the castle, which is your body, right? So you want to keep the castle from falling apart. So you want that army, which is your immune system, ready to go. And so what you've done is you've primed that army so that it's ready to go. Like if you've used, think about like army tactics, right? If the military uses one same thing every single time and you know it's coming, then the military or your immune system knows exactly how to attack that. You could kind of think of these vaccines being the same way. You've set up your immune system so that military is now fully prepared to fight that off. And the reason that we're getting those big responses the second time is because it's already seen it. It's ready to go. It's ready to go now. And so really, in my opinion, and I recognize you may not like not feeling well after you get that booster or getting that I call it the booster, sorry, the second vaccine, it's your body fighting it off. And so as your body's fighting it off and you don't feel well, to me, it's actually a good thing. I mean, I hate to tell you that, but it's a good thing because that means that your body is fully prepared such that if you were exposed to COVID, that army's ready to go and it's going to fight it off.
Awesome. Let's see. And I guess I'll try to leave with this and Sue, maybe you can answer this one. So there's been a lot of stuff on the internet and people talking. When you go in to get your second shot, or I guess even your first shot, should you stay away from taking things like ibuprofen before you get the shot?
Again, you have to follow the directions of your healthcare provider. And for a lot of people who come in, we give them the recommendations before we give that first or second vaccine. We let them know that really what we're talking about when we're talking about Tylenol and ibuprofen, it's that localized discomfort they feel where that needle actually pierced into their skin. The Tylenol and the ibuprofen are not doing anything to lessen the vaccine or lessen the virus or anything that. We're really using those medications to kind of decrease the mild discomfort. When I say mild discomfort, the expectation, even after the second vaccine, is usually no more than 24 hours. It's not immediate. Once you get the second vaccine, you can certainly drive home. It's just being able to report the commonalities, what we call side effects. When we talk about side effects, they're not necessarily things that are going to be bad. They're just things to be aware of.
Thank you very much. With that, everyone, we've kind of gone over our hour limit. I thank everyone so much for attending. Just a few quick things. This presentation has been recorded and it will be available at rcsj.edu/townhall. And I'm sure once it's ready, we can send an email out too to let everyone know. Again, as you've heard from our expert panelists, I mean, these are people that understand the science behind this. These vaccines are safe and you should really get one as soon as you can to help keep yourself safe, your family safe, and everyone that you know safe. So please go sign up and go to rcsj.edu/vaccine, follow the links that we have there. I also dropped a phone number into the chat. So I'd say about 2 weeks ago, the state of New Jersey put out a phone number as well. So if you obviously help your mom and dad, anyone that's elderly that is having trouble signing up. And we know that's an issue. We've been hearing it. You see it all the time. But there's also a phone number that folks can call now too. and that's 1-855-568-0545. Now, I will just say I've heard that the wait time can be very long when you do call that number. So I would say the best option really is try to register on the web, because you will get an email when it's time for your group to be able to go sign up to make an appointment. And like I've said, just from personal experience with family members, those appointments seem to be opening up a bit more now that the vaccine seems to be flowing in from the federal government more of a steady way. So again, with that, I thank everyone. I thank our expert panelists. It was really a great presentation. Please be safe, everyone. Godspeed.